So, how many of y'all, when Aaron read that text, had the scene from Jesus Christ Superstar in your head? It is certainly in mine, permanently burned in there. I love this scene because in it, Jesus, being played by Ted Neely, completely loses his cool and goes on a rampage, knocking over every display stand, every table, every bird cage. He swings a rifle by the barrel like a baseball bat and just scares everyone in the whole area to death. And Neely's half screech, half tenor, frightening off all the rest of the bystanders with a stern, "Get out!" Andrew Lloyd Webber does a brilliant job of depicting the uncontrolled fury of Jesus when he confronts the marketplace at the temple. The only problem is that Andrew Lloyd Webber's depiction doesn't have a whole lot to do with what's written in the Gospels. Just saying. In the first three Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, what scholars call the synoptic or parallel Gospels, this scene happens in the very last days of Jesus' life and ministry. It's what sets in motion his arrest. And the emotion Jesus displays is not fury, like Ted Neely, but rather it's grief. In Luke's gospel, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem, wants to hold her and love her like a mother hen protecting her chicks.
But in John's gospel, which was written about 60 years probably after Jesus' life, the cleansing of the temple comes at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. This is at the very start. There's been one miracle, but that's the only thing before this. And we believe it has a different symbolic meaning. That it's not about Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. It's to show right off the bat that Jesus is in conflict with the religious and the political powers that be in Jerusalem. John wants us as the readers to know that Jesus rejected the temple cult that was in some ways a tool of the Roman occupation, and rejected the corrupt leadership that was subverting the real liberating message of Judaism. And at a deeper level, writing a generation after Rome had destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, I think John wants us to know that Jesus himself is the true temple. That it's Jesus who is the center of God's presence and the locus of how God acts in the world. Not a temple of stone, but a temple of resurrected flesh. So all four of these Gospels, all of which have a cleansing of the temple scene, we believe that it means something other than, even Jesus lost his temper sometimes, though I've used it in that way on occasion. I think what Jesus was doing was a choreographed act and a nonviolent act, believe it or not, of what we would now call protest theater. That he was trying to make a very visual point about a difficult spiritual truth. This symbolic action that Jesus took was in the line of the ancient prophets of Israel, where Jeremiah walked around with an oxen yoke on his shoulders to show people how they should be linked to God, or Ezekiel lying on his side for 40 days in the middle of Jerusalem so that people would hear his message. It's an action meant to provoke questions and wake people up about what they're doing.
So Jesus clearing the temple courtyard was not spontaneous fury. Think of what he's doing here. It takes time to sit down and braid a 3 or 4 corded drover's whip in the middle of a marketplace with an audience of curious onlookers going, what is this guy doing? And when finished, a drover's whip is the instrument of a shepherd, not a soldier. Animals and people were driven out, yes. The tables of the money changers were overturned, absolutely. But crucially, and there should be a warning, a warning like, no people or animals were harmed in the cleansing of this temple. It was non-violent protest action.
Dramatic.
But dramatic, as good protest theater is. Some biblical scholars also think that Jesus was acting not only against the particular way that the chief priest Caiaphas was turning the temple into a Kmart blue light special, but in the tradition of prophets like Isaiah, Jesus was protesting the belief system undergirding temple sacrifice itself. There was a theology, and we still have it, a theology of redemptive violence that says, if you've messed up royally, like we all do, in order to get back into right relationship with God, what you need to do is somehow externalize your sins, project them onto some literal or figurative scapegoat, and kill it, or ostracize it, or banish it, or set up laws to keep it from being in your midst. And that will make you cool with God. Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Jesus all proclaim clearly that is not how God works. I despise your burnt offerings. I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
And so what does this cleansing of the temple mean for us? Maybe you recognized sin in your own life, and you know your relationship with God isn't what you would like. You don't renew that relationship through sacrifice or through scapegoating. You renew it by connecting with God, by coming home, coming to God's house, maybe, coming in prayer, coming in song, coming in community to be renewed and restored. We've said this before. One of the ways to understand the incarnation of Jesus is God saying, okay, look, I'll show you who I am by coming to live among you already. I'll show you how to live by being a human person with you. It's a little intimate and it's a little scary all at once, really. And I think Jesus' cleansing of the temple is another way of God saying, if you want to know me, just come. Get rid of all the things that get in the way of you coming into my presence. Pray and engage me, and together we'll figure out what your next steps in the world are, how you can be part of healing and justice and love. Also intimate, also a little scary, all at once.
But that's our constant question, isn't it? How do we engage the world toward love and justice and healing? How do we engage the world when it is such a mess in so many ways? And perhaps more important, how do we engage the world when we're such a mess in so many ways? And how do we say no to the myth of redemptive violence as a solution to the pain of past wounds?
One of the places that I've found answers to those questions are in a book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. He's a trauma therapist and an anti-racist activist in Minnesota. And he talks about the distinction between clean pain and dirty pain. He affirms, as we shared last week in our sermon, that we all have pain in our life. We don't get to decide whether we have pain. What we get to decide is, what do we do with it? And so Menakem talks about how clean pain is pain that we acknowledge and that we engage intentionally to work through it, to work with it, to turn it to healing, if at all possible. Menakem talks about metabolizing pain. The same way we metabolize food when we eat it and we break it down into the building blocks that our bodies need to live and grow. Menakem says we can do the same thing with our pain in our emotions and in our bodies. And when we do, we learn to settle our quick reactions, which sometimes stand us in good stead if a bus is about to hit us, but so often do not stand us in good stead. Clean pain helps us be thoughtfully responsive instead of immediately reactive. It still hurts. Pain is pain, but it's hurt toward healing. Resmaa doesn't write his book from a faith background, but I would add that this description of metabolizing pain to me is about how do we pour God's love through our pain in a way to make it bring healing in the world. And when we choose to do so, our bodies settle. Not just our emotions, also our bodies do. We become more capable of handling discomfort. And when we settle, people around us can settle too.
In contrast to clean pain, Resmaa Menakem talks about dirty pain, which is what happens when we refuse to do the hard work of metabolizing the pain in our lives, and instead we just blow it on to somebody else. Often the person that we think is responsible for our pain. We project our discomfort onto someone else so that we make them hurt the way we hurt. Am I the only one who's done that? We strike back, we strike out physically or verbally or emotionally or all three. As we often say, hurt people hurt people. But dirty pain doesn't heal anything. It just multiplies the wounds in body and in spirit. Scapegoating is an institutionalized kind of dirty pain. It projects my pain, my guilt onto an innocent instead of my dealing with my own pain and guilt in such a way that it's transformative within myself. It feels better for a minute to scapegoat someone, but there's always a hangover. And it's not a long-term fix because that person now feels the need to do the same thing. Maybe back at me or back at someone who's lower on the rungs than they are.
And we'll let you come up with all of the current world applications of what we've just said.
Clean pain does not necessarily mean that we are calm all the time.
Right.
Sometimes the process of metabolizing our pain can lead us to make dramatic action toward change. As dramatic as Jesus overturning the tables of the temple, calling out the scapegoating culture, not skateboarding culture. Jesus was fine. Jesus loved skateboarding culture. Scapegoating culture. And it was that turning over the tables that was symbolizing how he was inviting people to engage God directly in God's house and everyone's house. Yes, he turns over tables and drives animals out, but it's not in vengeance. It's not dirty pain. He turns them over to open up new possibilities that restore authentic relationship between human beings and with God. And I suspect the cows and the sheep and the doves are pretty happy about that possibility as well. That's right.
I love the picture that's on the front of our bulletin where the tables are up in the air, right? Like completely throwing them off.
And the cows are going, good job, Jesus.
Right. Yeah. I think it's also important to remember that the cleansing of the temple was in the context of all the ministry that Jesus did. It's not the only thing that he did. I think that John puts it at the beginning of his gospel to say to us that he was a teacher who engaged God in all that he did, in all that he taught. Jesus' ministry again and again is an opportunity to metabolize the pain of others. He healed them, he redeemed them, he brought them back into community, and he asks us to do the same whenever we can. A couple of years ago, we came across a powerful, true story of the power of clean pain in what could only be described as a tragedy. It was an episode from StoryCorps on National Public Radio, and we're going to play the audio of it for you this morning because it's so much more powerful to hear them speak than to hear us talk about it.
It's 3 minutes long, and hopefully all our technology will work together.
In 1995, 14-year-old Tony Hicks shot and killed 20-year-old Tariq Khamisa in a gang-related robbery. Tony became the youngest person in California to be charged as an adult and served the majority of his sentence in maximum security prisons. While Tariq's father, Azim, was grieving his son, he also came to a realization.
I had this out-of-body experience, and God sent me back to my body with the wisdom that there are victims at both ends of the gun.
A few years into Tony's sentence, Azim and Tony met for the first time. Tony was released in 2019, and they recently spoke using StoryCorps Connect.
It took me 5 years to develop enough courage to come and meet you. What do you remember about our first meeting?
We were in the visiting room in Folsom State Prison. I had been anxious over meeting you. I felt so horrible for what I did that I wanted to be able to do something to help you heal in some type of way.
I was amazed of your composure. You didn't portray any of the typical attitude of a 19-year-old in our culture.
Well, coming into a maximum security prison at 16, I had to grow up and mature a little bit just to survive in there.
You know, one of the questions I had for you is if Tariq said anything to you, because you were the last person to see him. We locked eyes for a long time. It's painful.
It was the most difficult conversation that I had in my life.
You were remorseful. You took responsibility for your actions. And in that moment, I got that the spark in you was no different than the spark in me. It was at that point I told you that I have forgiven you.
Your forgiveness was heavy on me. I didn't feel like I was deserving because I knew what I had taken away from you. But your example gave me space to work on understanding that I was worth being forgiven.
I always felt forgiveness is something you give to yourself. I grew up in the Sufi tradition, and I think that helped me a lot to know that I didn't want to go through life in anger and revenge. And after our first meeting, my stride was much bouncier leaving the prison than the one I had walked in with. And I thought to myself, why did I wait 5 years? Because it was a gift. And I honor you for doing that.
Years later, when I was released from prison, I wanted to go back to where I murdered Tariq and just bring my past and my present together in that moment. I wanted to reaffirm to Tariq I was a changed person and that I wouldn't squander this opportunity.
I liked what you said, Tony, to bring your past and present together. That pain is not a bad thing if it makes you a better person. That's how I feel this journey has been for me.
You are instrumental in the person that I am today. And I am extraordinarily grateful to know you and to have you in my life.
That story was the story of two men who did the hard work of metabolizing their pain. And what came out of it was forgiveness and love and healing.
And relationship.
And a relationship. It's an invitation that Jesus offers each of us, wherever we are. Jesus offers forgiveness and grace, and it gives us the freedom and a safe space to metabolize our own pain, receive forgiveness, and perhaps offer it to those we didn't think we could.
And so as we get ready to come to communion today, anything that you think stands between you and the communion table, know that you are welcome to come.